Alright, so now we will implement fetching the data to our grid of cards and actually showing the card data from the database. And to do that, we want to go inside our homepage, inside the grid section that we show each card here. And first we're going to add an X data. This X data will house our variables and are the function to load the actual data, okay? So we'll add an X data as an object. We will define the loading variable to indicate loading, and then items to have the actual items, which are the records of this collection of cards from our database, okay? So after that, we will define a variable called total pages, and this will house the total pages number coming from the database. We will also need the page number to give us an index of which page we're actually fetching the data from. And after that, we will create our async load items function. And this function would do the loading or the fetching data from the database via pocket-based client.js. So first we're going to set the loading to be true. Then we're going to write our try catch error. Finally, the loading false. Whenever we have an error, we will console log this error, and then we will increase the page number. So instead of 0, it will be 1, and then we will fetch the actual records in the page 1 from the database. And to do that, we will add an if statement. Before we actually fetch the record, we'll add an if statement to check if the page number is more than the total pages. Then we won't fetch the data because there is no data. So we will return. After that, we will create our response, const response. We're awaiting the pocket-base.collection and the collection of cards. And then we will use the getList method to get a list of data. We will give it the this.page, so we will give it the number of page that we're going to fetch from, and the second argument here is the amount of records we want in each page. You can see that this is, for example, the page, and this is the offset. And then we will give it an object. This object will have our sort, and if we have a filter to the content, we can also add the filter here. Since we're not going to use any filter, we're going to remove this and actually only use the sort based on the date created. Next, we will update our items variable here to be the items that currently we have spread out, and then we will append to them the items from the response. After that, we will update our total pages number to be the same as the total pages coming from the actual response. Then we would go ahead and update our looping inside the X4 for the template, and we will loop into the actual items. So for item in items, we will display a card. And we will add an X in it to load the initial items, the first items. So we will add the next tick. So next tick in Alpine.js would actually load or execute the code inside of the next tick after the component is initialized. And this is helpful because we want to make sure that the pocket base is loaded in order to actually load the content. So we would use next tick, and then we would run the load items just like that. This would run our initial fetch items and fetch the initial items in our page. We'll update our card to show the actual title from the database using xtext, and we would choose item.title. This item variable is the same item that we have actually implemented in our for loop when we said x for item in items. We'll also update the text of the paragraph or the content of the card. We updated the title also when the user hovered the card, and for the author we will remove it for now. Okay, so after that we'll also adjust the load more button to actually load more content. Right, so we would change the anchor tag to a button tag and remove some of the unnecessary attributes and add the add click listener. Whenever the user click this button, we would load the items. Now for demonstration purposes, we will make the number of items in each page 1, so we can actually see if we're loading more. We want to make sure that the load more button have access to the load more or load items. And to do that, cut the button from here. So we'll remove it from here and make it inside our grid of cards, or we can go ahead and create another div that houses the grid of cards and the button itself. So we will do that. So instead of having the X data on the actual div that has the grid, we will change this class or take this class away from here and add another div here. This div would actually have the class of grid and actually be the grid content and has the templates that will loop through our items. But then we have also the div from here, so we can remove this one and add it behind our button, just like that. Now we have this div of the actual button and its class. And we also have this div of the cards and the parent div that will house our data. And when we save right now and go back to our page and hit refresh button, we can see that exactly we're loading one because we chose to load one in each page. Go back to the database and actually create some cards. So I have created those 2 cards. And if we go back to our web page now, we can see one card is displayed here. And when we click load more, another one will be displayed. We click load more, it doesn't load any new cards. And if we want to make sure that these cards actually coming from the database, we can change, for example, the one of them, their titles. And when we refresh, we can see that this is saying hello. And if we load more, this says hello too. So we are actually fetching the content from the database. And if we want to take this a step further, we would, for example, remove or disable the load more button whenever the page variable is more than the total pages. So to do that, we go back to our button here and we add the attribute of disabled, and we will disable this button whenever the page, so the page number, is more than the total pages, meaning there is no more pages in the database, so there is no need to load more, right? So we go back here. You can also make it hidden, but we will do this. So for now it's available and you can click it, and whenever there's not more, it becomes like it kind of disappear. We also want to make sure to make it if it's more or equal than the total pages. And now if we hit refresh, we can see now when we load, it's actually working. When we click it now, we cannot click it anymore because it's disabled, because there's no more content in the database. If we add more content in the database, for example, we duplicate this card just to create a new card right here. And if we go back to our cards right now and hit the load more, or maybe hit the refresh button because it didn't refresh, okay, we can click the load more again, and you can see now we have all 3 cards inside of here. All right, now we will add a few more updates to our content to maybe show another template here to show the loading state. For example, we could say template and use the xif attribute from Alpine.js to actually show this template whenever the loading variable is true. So whenever it's loading, we will show maybe a span of loading, and you can implement here an SVG and animate it with the Tailwind CSS. I'm just gonna leave it as loading like that. So now we will have the text loading appear whenever fetching the data. And for our button, we will change the disabled attribute, be disabled when the loading state is true. And we will only show the button when we have less pages than the total number of pages, because we don't want to load more, or we cannot load more content if the content already loaded. After that, we can hit save and go refresh our page. Now we can see that if we load more the content, we can load the cards, and whenever we hit the maximum number of cards, we cannot see the load more button. And also, if we want to see the actual loading state here, we can go to the console and enter the network, add some throttling to the internet connection, and maybe make it slow 4G. And now if we hit the refresh button, we can see now the cards actually showing the loading state before they fetch. For example, when we click load more, you can see loading, and then you can see the card fetched from the database. So now to implement the cards inside the dashboard page and to only show the cards for this authenticated user, we would paste the same component of cards for the homepage, and we would change a few things. So here in the fetching data in the load items function, we will add filter to our query. So we want to filter the content fetched from the database to include only the content that has the ID of the user that is currently authenticated. So to do that, we will create a fetch or a filter query, and this filter query would be something like this. So we would say if the user, which means the field user of each card, is equal to string, this string inside of it will have the value of our authenticated user, and to get the value of the ID of the currently authenticated user, we will access the pp global variable and the auth store from that global variable, then the model, then the ID. And after we created this, now if we hit save and update or refresh our web page, in the dashboard, we can see now only the cards that we have currently created. And to verify this, we can go back to our database. Inside the cards section, we can see that here each card has a user. So we can change, for example, the user for this card. It won't show up in the dashboard. So the card with the title Hello World shouldn't be showing up in the dashboard. And if we refresh the page, we currently see hello, and if we load more, hello too, and we cannot load more cards, meaning that this will only show the cards that are created by this user. If we go back to the home page, we can see now we can actually show up 3 cards, but only 2 of them is created by this user. So currently implemented the dashboard's cards.